introduced you to and discussed as a central issue in Nietzsche's philosophy the doctrine of eternal recurrence, das ewige Wiederkehr. And we looked at this notion in the Vedas, in Indian philosophy, in the Upanishads. We also saw it in the Norse and Teutonic mythology. It was also, in a very different form, suggested in the religion that developed on the Iranian plateau, that is Zoroastrianism. Zoroaster repents of that religious teaching and presents a new teaching to the people. He repents and regrets the teaching because it is a religion of dualism and cosmic dualism and opposition, of light and dark, of good and evil, of the good deities and the evil ones, the devils, of cosmic conflict and conflagration. It's apocalyptic. There's a last judgment. There's an end of history. And Ahura Mazda triumphs in that history. That is a very, very different view than you get in the Teutonic Norse version of this. Very different. There in the religion of Zoroastrianism, there are these absolute opposed opposites in conflict, intent upon destroying one pair of these opposites so that just the others triumph. That notion that takes opposites rather than opposition, the notion that what nature requires is a continuum between light and dark, between life and death, between good and evil, and not an absolute distinction. So that, as Heraclitus himself taught, if you abrogate that opposition that way and cancel out one of them, existence, life is impossible. So what is interesting in the Teutonic version is this, with respect to that perpetual conflict between the opposites, times of equilibrium, of peace, times of conflict, peace being merely a tension, an equilibrium between opposing forces. Take that notion with deadly seriousness. So that with respect to the eternal recurrence that you get among the Teutonic and the Norse people, that Nietzsche was so interested in because it presents a different conception of nature and life than that which you get in the dualistic religions of what? Of Zoroastrianism, which influenced and was appropriated by the monotheistic religions of what? Judaism and Christianity in large measure, and also, to some extent, Islam. One still has it, the opposition between, in Judaism and Christianity, Shaitan. Shaitan is another name for Ahriman, the evil principle in Zoroastrianism, which Judaism appropriated during the Babylonian captivity and coming into contact with that religion. A very, very different view. Conflict until one triumphs and prevails over the other, and you have then ushered in the end of history, which it certainly would be. Peace and the dominance of one over the other. In the Teutonic tradition here, glorified by Nietzsche, glorified by Wagner in Das Ring des Nibelungen, the Nibelungenlied, the Song of the Nibelungs. In this respect, there is fight and conflict and opposition to the very end of time, in which case the gods, humanity, the good and evil go down in destruction. Valhalla, paradise, is destroyed, and the gods are swept into the maelstrom of nothingness. That is, into the flux, the Heraclitean flux. Nothing escapes it. Good and evil return unto nature, until, with this notion of eternal recurrence, over long, long, sweeping periods of time, the whole thing begins again, anew, the cycle, to repeat itself over and over and over in this way. There is no final goal on that view with respect to history, no ultimate and final end. It is a picture of, from the standpoint of purpose, no final goal, no end with respect to history. The process repeats itself inexorably, inescapably, over and over and over. It is an extraordinary sort of vision in which there can be no triumph of one over the other, the annihilation of it. This is complete illusion and misconception about the nature of history. Note, there is the enormous influence of Spinoza on the thinking of Nietzsche here. Nature is one, a single whole, totality. That is stressed. Space and time constitute such a whole. In that respect, it is neither created nor destroyed. Nature is self-contained and self-sufficient, neither created nor is it destroyed. That self-sufficiency, so that Spinoza could call it Deus sive natura, God or nature. In a way, this is very much Nietzsche's view too. It constitutes a sort of deification of nature, but you must change your conception of nature and not think of it in terms of the Christian valuational scheme, because the Christian valuational scheme has alienated us from nature and an understanding and appreciation of it. So that in a way you must come to the position as Spinoza did, that with respect to God or nature as a whole, Deus sive natura, it transcends values. It is jenseits von Gut und Böse. It is beyond good and evil. It is neither good nor is it evil when it comes to nature. It is innocent, absolutely innocent. Where do you think that you derive the authority to sentence and pass judgment on nature and on life, and to put a curse upon it, and to alienate yourself from it, to condemn it as evil? Where did you derive that authority? You derived it from the dualistic God, as a matter of fact, of Zoroastrianism that goes over into Christianity. That is the value system of Christianity that deifies God, has damned and cursed nature and alienated you from it, has made it evil. And Nietzsche is intent upon you learning not to moralize and not to judge and to use the conceptual framework of morality to judge and to curse nature at the expense of the deification of God. So one really wants to see what is involved in that notion of eternity as a circle. And the notion that you get in Nietzsche and in Wittgenstein of the Tractatus, that's very, very interesting, which you didn't get in Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer is interesting because having this modism and thinking of nature as vast will and energy, analogously to the way in which Nietzsche thinks of it, and accepting the Christian valuations. He's an atheist, but he accepts the Christian valuations, and it comes down with the inescapable judgment. Nature, the world, is evil. Evil. It is cruel. It is dreadful. You should desire to escape from it. Is there any escape from nature, this world, in Schopenhauerian pessimistic terms, that consists of nothing but suffering, aimlessness, misery? Is there any escape? The doctrine of salvation and the various possibilities. Could you escape through death? No, not even through death, because of the possibility of the eternal return. Over and over again, that doctrine in the Upanishads that even mesmerized their Schopenhauer. But nature is evil, and one should want to escape from it in death, once that one realizes that there is no God. That abysmal, pessimistic conception that Nietzsche, with respect to Schopenhauer, what turned you, with your atheism, against life and nature? That made you hate it? It's the Christian value presuppositions that you brought along with you, and you had better learn, as a matter of fact, how to break away from that, to reconcile yourself to nature, and to look at mankind, his history, as innocent in the way in which we look at the rest of nature and animals. The cat, the predator, all of these animals as innocent, not as guilty, and not to judge as though it were a human being or conscious agent, the whole of nature, and put a curse upon it, which is what happens and shows the extent to which those values have alienated you from nature and from life, the significance of that. So that in a way, seeing this notion of eternal return and taking it seriously, how does one then come to the view, as you do in Nietzsche and in the Wittgenstein and the Tractatus? We want to try and understand this. What is it to say that he who lives in the present, fully and completely in the present, lives in eternity? To live fully and completely in the present is to live in eternity. You remember in Goethe's Faust, which is so incredible, enormous, and interesting in Faust. What was it that Goethe was this pagan who admired the pagan attitude towards life, towards nature, as opposed to what Christianity did to us? I mean, Goethe in the same spirit as Nietzsche in that respect. Faust enters into a pact with Mephistopheles, but evil, the demonic, who agrees, that's so interesting, that he would do everything. Oh, Faust makes out of Mephistopheles his slave in this life to do his work for him. How extraordinarily clever of him. That is what it is to learn to manipulate evil and use it for your own purposes. I mean, the manner in which evil is tricked to do the work of the good or virtuous. Is it possible, as a matter of fact, to do this, and how clever it would be? Maybe a part of the job of living is to learn to do that. And Faust, if you can make life worth living so that I reconcile to it, enhance my life, so that I love it and accept it, nature and life. If you can do that for me, then in the hereafter, I will be yours. You can have my soul. No, the trick. You can have my soul upon death, provided that I have my body and this world and this life. Extraordinary. Who gets cheated in that bargain at the end? Who is it that gets cheated? It is incredible. It is utterly remarkable to see the unfolding of that drama. And so that Faust says, yes, looking at Mephistopheles and pledging the contract, yes, if ever you win, I die, I lose, if to the passing present moment I can ever say to it sincerely and completely, to life in that moment, I bleib stehen, du bist so schön. Remain, stop, you are so beautiful. I would have you forever, forever, if you can affirm life and nature this way. A joyous affirmation and reconciliation to nature and to life. If you can accomplish this, oh, you can have my soul. And as a matter of fact, there is the moment that happens creatively when he is doing work, reclaiming the soil, the earth, reclaiming it for his people, laboring and sustaining it. Talk about an environmentalist theme. Doing that, although, and he's using what? Slave labor. The minions of Mephistopheles himself. The minions of Mephistopheles to accomplish that. And he's blind now. He's blind at the end. But along with physical blindness, as the Greeks always had, it came ate, spiritual illumination and insight. And so upon this moment when he beholds what they are doing, working together for humanity as an ideal, humanity, not a god or gods, humanity and nature, and reconciled with it, what happens? He says at that moment, oh, bleib stehen, du bist so schön. And at that moment, he dies. And what does Mephistopheles say in this connection, looking at it, as he looks? The hour strikes midnight. And he's gone to eternal nothingness. To eternal nothingness. And he reaches for this elusive, shadowy, that's supposedly so important, the soul, and it vanishes. A little bit of tongue-in-cheek on the part of Goethe. The angels being seduced, what, carry him away. That notion here, the essential interconnection of good and evil, the possibility of rechanneling evil, of seducing it, luring it, making it work for other ends, and the notion that out of evil over time comes good, and out of good comes evil. In a way, you'll see, the Goethean view, if you take this along with the notion of amour, along with the notion of eternal return, he dies objectively to the long, long period of time in non-existence, but to return again. And when he does, with respect to that non-existence of a self-consciousness, it is like, in the twinkling of an eye, it all returns to him. All to be lived over again. And that is when he asked, could you stand this? You see, the basis upon which he does this is this one universe, nature, in which we live, that is a one, is what? It is finite. That is Nietzsche, like a good many thinkers in the 19th century and everywhere, deny the bad infinite. That there is an actual infinite. It is just a potential infinite. That is a possibility of endlessness through time, but not a completed actual infinite. That is what you must grasp here, so that that nature and world is finitary. There is the conservation of force, of energy. It's neither created nor destroyed. It's fixed quantity that is there. Neither created nor is it destroyed. It is continuously undergoing transformation from one form to another. That is, magnetic force is converted into electrical charge and vice versa. And chemical energy into electrical, and so on. All of the continuous transformations of the forces in nature. But it is a finite, fixed quantity. In that respect, even if it's a matter of probability, whether it's a matter of causal interconnectedness, or whether it is a matter of just sheer probabilities, the number of possibilities are finite, though extremely large. And over a sufficient period of time, unrestricted, all such possibilities must return on that view, that conception. Just as nature has the annual cycle within our world, there is that notion of the great cosmic year in which nature is indestructible as it's uncreated. It is dynamic and forever changing. Then all possibilities return either by necessity or just by the casting of the die of chance. That it must and shall return. And he asked about that in this connection. How many of you are strong enough for such a vision? Are you terrified of it? The possibility of, consider it. I mean, you complete this life, and those who live in the present live in eternity. And you will live it over and over and over and over again to the slightest detail with respect to this whole. You see, the point that he saw very early is it's finitary, not only with respect to the energy, but it is finitary with respect to space. The possibility that only became aware of people in the 19th century. That is that our space, the geometry of it is not Euclidean. It is elliptic. It is curved, bent. So just as you can pass along but a sphere, and it's finite, it's bounded, return to your point of departure, it is unbounded. You never encounter a boundary. That this is a logical possibility mathematically for three-dimensional space. That is, that if you were to move through space, what you took to be a straight line, you would eventually discover that there are no straight lines in the space. It's curved, in the sense that you eventually return to the point of departure, but you have never encountered a barrier. That is the way, in a way, that you get around the antinomies of Kant with respect to infinity. That either space and time must have had a beginning, in which you get the antinomies and paradoxes from that, or they could not have a beginning, infinite. In which case, what is this sort of an infinite, unbounded spatial whole? What is this that has no beginning and no end that is time? In which, as Plato suggested in the Theaetetus, the Demiurgos, not being able to give us eternity, gave us the next best thing to it, a moving image of eternity. The circle. And one of the things that Nietzsche did immediately was to see, unlike Kant, space and time are fused together. I mean, it may be that our experience of space and time are different sorts of experiences, different intuitions, as Kant says, but that is misleading, because we encounter events not things, events, happenings. And a happening is something that happens at a place and at a given time. They are not separated. They're absolutely together. And Nietzsche, with that speculative audacity it is, and sort of genius, said, but if the space is curved, then the time too must be curved. And in that respect, the whole of nature is a space-time continuum, like Spinoza. But note, Spinoza didn't have any place for time in his view, in his metaphysics. I mean, he had the one substance, Deus sive natura, that is nature, and the infinity of attributes of nature, of which we know only two, space and mind or consciousness. Borrowing that from Descartes. But the truth of the matter is, it's happened over and over again with respect to earlier philosophy. They ignore time. And now this is exactly what is the matter with that. This is exactly what you have with respect to Nietzsche as one of the first process philosophers. And space and time unified together in this respect with a finite amount of energy, forces available, even though it's enormous, the universe in which we live, must eventually, over cosmic epochs, as he thought, return. Now, when he talks with the dwarf about that possibility and all, suppose some evil being came to and whispered to you, this vision, this is the way it must be, inevitably. How would you react and respond to it? And the different possibilities of living with it, the terror. How many of you would want to go through your whole life up to this point? You answer it and answer it different ways depending upon where you are in life. You might change your mind if you live some years more, either for the one way or the other. But would have the courage, and what would this be, to be able to say, God, with all of the pettiness, the ugliness, the misery, the filth, as well as the beauty and the glory of life, to return. I stop, and when I think of various episodes in my own, and you can do it with respect to yourself too, I think, oh, the hot dread of repeating, going through that, the embarrassment, the shame, the guilt, the suffering. And then on the other hand, the joy, the ecstasy. Friends, long gone now. Wonderful occasions, experiences in the past. As I thought about it, I hadn't thought about it for some time the other day, I thought, since I've been mourning the death of my Irish Terrier, I thought, I mean to repeat the day that I first saw that little book and went into my heart. To think that will return. That's redemptive. A great deal. There are other things too. But in that respect, it takes a certain courage. How much truth can an individual live with, reconcile oneself to? A hardness with respect to a choice of that sort. But Nietzsche sees it's very important as to how each and every one of us will answer that question now or later, because this now ties up intimately with will to power as we pursue it and try to see how it ties together. Intimately with the notion of the Übermensch and the higher man. All of these themes are most intimately related and connected when it comes to Nietzsche's philosophy. And in the end, not only the will to power there, but also the ultimate issue of nihilism. For if a person could say, in spite of it all, it is worth living repeatedly, infinitely, over and over and over again, that is the most absolute, splendid affirmation of nature and of life. It is to have triumphed over nihilism. It is to have successfully triumphed over nihilism, if one could do that. I mean, in this respect, to look, it means a willingness to affirm life and to affirm nature to all eternity. To wheel backwards, as Nietzsche says, to wheel backwards. That is, over and over again, we hate the past, what might have been the sadness. And we cannot undo the past. We cannot undo it. We cannot redeem it. Can God even undo the past and redeem it in that way? But if one is willing to say and look at it, I, in the present, with the past behind me and the past in the future again, I will it once more, amor fati, love of one's destiny. Can you do amor fati, love of one's destiny, of one's fate? I so will it. May it come once more into the tide, once more, and again, the ultimate triumph in that respect over nihilism, that affirmation of life, of nature, of self, a sense not of life as pleasure or of happiness, but of an absolutely transcendental and redeeming joy that one could come to look at life as worth living and loving, like the dance, for its own sake, for the intrinsic value in it. In this case, one wills it now, and that's the way one can go back, as a matter of fact, to the past, and to reaffirm it. That is what is meant by willing backwards, by being able to affirm the past, and as he says in amor fati, to recognize that all of the so-called good and evil, the small and the high, the joy and the suffering and the depression, all inextricably go together and must be affirmed as one. That you cannot have it all without affirming, as a matter of fact, the totality, and willing to do it. Amor fati, love of destiny, of all that has been. How many, as a matter of fact, are capable of doing this? And for Nietzsche, it is to will life, not death. To will eternal life in this world and nature. Not to will another life. A life hostile to life and nature in another world. It is a very, very different conception. It is to affirm the pagan vision of life and rebirth, as you have in Dionysus, who is rented and dies in this life and is resurrected to life in this life, not to a hereafter and another world, but to this life, world and nature, not to a vain and empty promise of a paradisical existence that is the counter to nature and history, which is a model of perfection by which this life and this world is as nothing, the extent to which this life and this world has been denigrated. And so we get, what is life in nature? How are we to understand both of these? And Nietzsche's injunction to come to this sort of wisdom, die Fröhliche, the joyful wisdom, is not to think of nature in moralistic terms at all, but in naturalistic terms. And in that respect, to think of nature in all of its innocence as Jenseits von Gut und Böse, as beyond good and evil, in which certainly one does not bring in that scale of valuations. One brings in another. Considerations of that which preserves life, enhances it, and is enriching, rather than that which is destructive and is life impoverishing. In that respect, then, nature would certainly appear from other value schemes, as it did to the Greeks, as sublime, as beautiful, breathtaking, terrifying, challenging, always a changing. That is why I say, for the paganism, gods are in nature with us. There is that sense of reverence. Not note worship. Deus sive natura. This sort of a God which is identified with nature as though is pantheism. And in that respect, it is but not worship. It's reverence and acceptance and affirmation. Nature is something to be revered. And reverence goes with love. Whereas the old God and the transcendent God is an object of worship, which goes with fear and apprehension. And where one is worshipped, there is no love. But it is possible to reconcile oneself to what it is that one reveres, nature. That it's possible to have an attitude of love towards it, which means a relationship to it of preservation and immediate relationship that is very different to the relationship to nature that is the product of the creation of a transcendent God who is separate from it, and as a matter of fact, who invites us to a transcendent world, different from and completely apart from nature. So in this respect, one thinks of the early pagan religions, the earth mother, Demeter, and the relationship of us to the earth mother, Demeter, to Dionysus, the deity that can be revered and truly loved. How many have ever succeeded in loving the God of Judaism or Christian love? Well, a few perhaps who did, like the old hermit in the forest in Also sprach Zarathustra, had contempt and hatred for mankind and nature, and was an ascetic. I mean, if he succeeded in loving God, it was at the expense of nature and mankind. One must not forget that. But in my case, I know perfectly well, I could feel reverence and love for nature itself, followed in that respect, or a nature deity. But it was impossible for me ever to have felt love for the God of Judaism and Christianity. Fear, you might indeed. The judge, yes, the judging, tyrannical father, but love in that respect. Really, how many of you know yourself or know what you're talking about when you say that a God that you worship in fear and trembling, to use Kierkegaard's expression, that's the relationship that you ever could really love? It's a divinity. Dionysus, life resurrected to this world eternally, not to another world hereafter. There are various reflections that you should just consider the hypothesis and how you relate to it, and whether you would be able to affirm it or not. T.S. Eliot, the Four Quartets, and the first one and one after. he deals with Bradley's view of time in appearance and reality, and Bergson's view of time also in his metaphysical writings, and also Nietzsche as a compromise as between. Listen to these lines now and ponder them in connection with what Nietzsche has to say about space-time. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction remaining a perpetual possibility, only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden. My words echo thus in your mind, but to what purpose disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden. Shall we follow? Quick, said the bird, and find them round the corner through the first gate. Into our first world shall we follow the deception of the thrush, into our first world. There they were dignified and visible, moving without pressure over the dead leaves and the autumn heat, through the vibrant air, and the bird called in response to the unheard music hidden in the shrubbery, and the unseen eye being crossed for the roses at the look of flowers that are looked at. There they were as our guest, accepted and accepting, so we moved, and they, in a formal pattern, along the empty alley into the box circle, to look down into the drained pool. Dry the pool, dry concrete, brown edged, and the pool was filled with water out of sunlight, and the lotus rose quietly. The surface glittered out of heart of light, and they were behind us, reflected in the pool. Then a cloud passed, and the pool was empty. Go, said the bird, for the leaves were full of children, hidden excitedly, containing laughter. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Time past and time future. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. And then this beautiful and extraordinary image here. I mean, if we take that seriously and that repetition, he has the image of these ancient people dancing on their own graves. What is to be their grave? Where they were buried in epochs and eons long before. So, in my beginning is my end. In succession, houses rise and fall, crumbled or extended or removed, destroyed, restored, or in their place is an open field or a factory or bypass. Old stone to new building, old timber to new fires, old fires to ashes, and ashes to the earth, which is already flesh, fur, and feces. Bone, abandoned beast, cornstalk and leaf, houses live and die. There is a time for building, and a time for living, and for generation, and a time for the wind to break the loosened pane, and to shake the wainscot where the field mouse trots, and to shake the tattered arras woven with the silent motto. In my beginning is my end. Now the light falls across the open field, leaving the deep lane shuttered with branches dark of the afternoon, where you lean against the bank while a van passes, and the deep lane insists on the direction into the village, and the electric heat hypnotized. In a warm haze, the sultry light is absorbed and refracted by gray stone. The dahlias sleep in the empty silence, wait for the early hour. In that open field, if you do not come too close, If you do not come to close on a summer midnight, you can hear the music of the big pipe and the little drum, and see them dancing around the bonfire, the association of man and woman, in Don Sinji, signifying matrimony, a dignified and commodious sacrament. Two and two, necessary co-inunction, holding each other by the hand or arm, which a betokeneth concord. Round and round the fire, leaping through the flames, or joined in circles, circles, mystic circles, rustic and solemn or in rustic laughter, lifting heavy feet and clumsy shoes, earth feet, lone feet lifted in country mirth, mirth of those long since under earth, nourishing the corn, keeping time, keeping the rhythm in their dancing, as in their living, in the living seasons, the time of the seasons and the constellations, the time of milking and the time of harvest, the time of the coupling of man and woman and that of beast, feet rising and falling, eating and drinking, dung and death. Dawn points. And now another day prepares for heat and silence. Out at sea, the dawn wind wrinkles and slides. I am here, or there, or elsewhere in my continuum. Yes. Just a bit more, it's magnificent. What is the late November doing with the disturbance of the spring and creatures of the summer heat and snowdrops writhing under feet and hollyhocks that aim too high, ready to break and tumble down, late roses filled with early snow. Thunder rolled with the rolling stars simulates triumphal cars, deployed in constellated wars. Scorpion fights against the sun until the sun and moon go down. Comets weep and leonids fly, hunt the heaven and the plains, whirled in a vortex that shall bring the world to that destructive fire which burns before the ice cap rains. That was a way of putting it, not very satisfactory. A paraphrastic study in a worn-out poetical fashion, leaving one still with the intolerable wrestle with words and meanings. The poetry does not matter. It was not to start again, which one had expected. What was to be the value of the long look forward to, long hope for calm, the autumnal serenity, and the wisdom of age? Had they deceived us or deceived themselves, the quiet-voiced elders bequeathing us merely a receipt for deceit? The serenity only a deliberative attitude, the wisdom only the knowledge of dead secrets, useless in the darkness into which they peered, or from which they turn their eyes. There is, it seems to us at best, only a limited value in the knowledge derived from experience. The knowledge imposes a pattern and falsifies, for the pattern is now in every moment, and every moment is a new and shocking valuation of all we have been. We are only undeceived of that which deceiving could no longer harm. In the middle, not only in the middle of the way, but all the way in a dark wood and a bramble, on the edge of a grimpen where is no secure foothold, and menaced by monsters, fancy lights, risking enchantment. Do not let me hear of the wisdom of old men, but rather of their folly, their fear of fear and frenzy, their fear of possession, of belonging to another or to others, or to God. The only wisdom we can hope to acquire is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless. The houses are all gone under the sea. The dancers are all gone under the hill. Oh, dark, dark, dark. I read on with this, and because I think it's one way to convey something to you. I'm sorry that we live in an age that people cannot understand the language of poetry. They obviously do not. They don't even know how to read it. As you do not understand the language of music and great music. What it is to live in a decadent age. Oh, dark, dark, dark. They all go into the dark, the vacant interstellar spaces, the vacant into the vacant, the captains, merchant bankers, eminent men of letters, the generous patrons of art, the statesmen and the rulers, distinguished civil servants, chairmen of many committees, industrial lords and petty contractors, all go into the dark. And dark the sun and moon, and the Almanac de Gotha, and the Stock Exchange Gazette, the director of directors, and cold the sense and loss, the motive of action. And we all go with him into the silent funeral, nobody's funeral, for there is no one to bury. I said to my soul, be still, and let the dark come upon you. What shall be the darkness of God? As in a theater, the lights are extinguished for the scene to be changed, with a hollow rumble of wings, with a movement of darkness on darkness. And we know that the hills and the trees, the distant panorama, and the bold imposing facade are all being rolled away. Or as when an underground train in the tube stops too long between stations, and the conversation rises and slowly fades into silence, and you see behind every face the mental emptiness deepen, leaving only the growing terror of nothing to think about. Or when under ether the mind is conscious, but conscious of nothing. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. For hope would be hope for the wrong thing, wait without love. For our love would be the love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. Whisper of running springs, running streams and winter lightning. The wild thyme unseen and the wild strawberry, the laughter in the garden echoed ecstasy. Not lost, but requiring pointing to the agony of death and birth. You say, I am repeating something I said before. I shall say it again. Shall I say it again? And say it again. In order to arrive there, to arrive where you are, to get from where you are not, you must go by a way wherein there is no ecstasy. In order to arrive at what you do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. In order to possess what you do not possess, you must go by the way of dispossession. In order to arrive at what you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you do not know is the only thing you know. And what you own is what you do not own. And where you are is where you are not. Yes, you should pick up. It's fascinating to read Eliot in the light of that antithesis between Bradley and Bergson and Nietzsche that stands in the breach between, as a matter of fact, the view of the two. There is obviously something of a mystical vision here at this place in Nietzsche, which ties up Nietzsche with Wittgenstein of the Tractatus and Martin Heidegger in Sein, a similar sort of perspective. To get that, it is interesting to note that Nietzsche was enormously influenced by Schopenhauer's Die Welt Ausstellung und Vorstellung, the world is will and representation, and that Nietzsche reacted against it enormously. And Wittgenstein was enormously impressed by it, and in his own way, mystical way, reacted against the extreme pessimism that led to thinking of nature and life as not worth living. That led, as a matter of fact, to nihilism, the nihilism that you had in Schopenhauer. I mean, it's that Eastern Oriental religion, Buddhism, of course, Jainism, together with Christianity and Christian values primarily, that led Schopenhauer to pass sentence and a judgment on nature as rotten, corrupt, and evil. And we should all want to escape. Life is essentially evil, something to be condemned. Take that notion seriously of nature is finitary, is not infinite. There is no actual infinite. And take that seriously. It's a whole. The energy a constant. It waxes and wanes. There is the flood, the interchange, the transformation within it. But nature is self-sufficient. There is nothing outside of it. As a matter of fact, Schopenhauer saw this, and it was evident. Wittgenstein would echo it, and Nietzsche too. What sense could you possibly make? This is theologians' twaddle, nonsense, which you get over and over again, to talk about God as transcending a nature, as outside of it. What could you possibly mean? We know how to use those expressions and are taught to use inside and outside. Those are spatial location statements. That is the difference between being in this room and outside of this room. And to be outside of this room, we understand that is a spatial relation and is to be in space. That's how we are taught that language. What other use is there of it? Except a metaphorical one, and one confuses than that. What could be meant by saying that something is outside time or outside space? And now you're asking just for sense as we are taught those expressions. God is outside space. Well, we understand it this way, and why not? He's nowhere. And that's just what I think. And he's outside time. That is, I understand that too. He's nowhere at any time. That's one way of understanding that expression. That's the way Wittgenstein takes it at the end of the Tractatus. Look how, in a way, you can either speak of an atheistic mysticism or a pantheistic mysticism in the attitude towards nature. So I shall read now a section and I want you to think about it. Very carefully. It's in reaction to, here, a reaction against Schopenhauer here. And note the quite different sense in response. Of the will as the subject of the ethical, we cannot speak. And the will as a phenomenon is only of interest to psychology. If good or bad willing changes the world, it can only change the limits of the world, not the facts, not the things that can be expressed in language. In brief, the world must thereby become quite another. It must, so to speak, wax or wane as a whole. Die Welt des Glücklichen, seine andere als die des Unglücklichen. The world of the happy is quite another than that of the unhappy. As in death too, the world does not change. The world does not change, but ceases. Because the limits of my world, the limits of the world. Death is not an event of life. Death is not lived through. If by eternity is understood not endless temporal duration, but timelessness, then he lives eternally who lives in the present. Our life is endless in the way that our visual field is without limit. The temporal immortality of the human soul, that is to say, its eternal survival after death, is not only in no way guaranteed by any means, but this assumption in the first place will not do for us what we always tried to make it do, is a riddle solved by the fact that I survive forever. The riddle of the meaning of life and death, to be solved and resolved by my living forever. Is this eternal life then not as enigmatic, as puzzling and paradoxical as our present one? The solution of the riddle of life in space and time lies outside of space and time. That is to say, it has no solution. If it does, you must find it in life, in space and time, here and now. If you were to find it, or you will not find it at all. It is not problems of natural science which have to be solved. How the world is completely indifferent for what is higher. God does not reveal himself in the world. What is this to say? The facts all belong only to the task and not to its performance. Not how the world is the mystical, but that it is. That it is at all. The contemplation of the world, sub specie aeterni, is its contemplation as a limited whole. To see the world sub specie aeterni, under the aspect of eternity, is to see it as a limited, that is a finite, finitary whole, which involves that sense of immensity, enormous immensity, but of self-sufficiency and of repetition. The feeling of the world as a limited whole is a mystical feeling. The feeling that one belongs to it, is a part of it, and overwhelmed by it, in part. But that sense of belonging in such a sense of it must all return. And the willingness to accept as a matter of fact, that, to affirm it. For an answer which cannot be expressed, or the question too cannot be expressed, the riddle does not exist. There is no real riddle. The riddle is the riddle, as Zarathustra, the riddler and the unriddler, who poses riddles and poses riddle about what is the meaning of life. The riddle does not exist. And it does not answer, though, the question, is it worth living? For yes. That is for you to decide whether you can affirm it, and is it worth living? Without there being any answers. Those of you who want a riddle and an answer to a riddle, you're caught up. under Christian creationist cosmologies, things of that sort. Those who have, it's nothing but round and round and round, going nowhere. And those people who say, well, you only live once, may be quite mistaken. I mean, maybe it goes over and over and over and over, and doesn't have a bit of meaning. We're not going anywhere. Once more, into reach. It is infinitely worth living, even if it is, in that sense, meaningless, without a purpose. Crybabies, little crybabies, who want their riddles and the answers to it. They're not going to be very happy with theirs. If a question can be put at all, that can also be answered. Why is it we feel that even if all possible scientific questions were answered, the problems of life still have not been touched at all? Of course, there is then no question left. And just this is the answer. The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of this problem. Very Nietzschean and very Wittgensteinian, early Wittgenstein. Is not this the reason why men, who after long doubting the sense of life became clear, could not then say wherein the sense consisted? There is indeed the inexpressible. This shows itself. It is the mystical. And then, of course, the intervening propositions in both Anman and Nietzsche sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen, whereof one cannot speak, whereof one must be silent. Very Wittgensteinian sort of theme. The experience of the world is limited whole. Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, Kierkegaard. The significance of my life is what falls within my life and is livable and repeatable. The world is my world in this sense. That within it I can find the meaning is not something that is to come, that is postponed. By dying, I am not cheated out of the ultimate tragic finale of the drama or the theater. No. That is not the way it works. He who lives in the present lives in eternity. Everyone, wherever they live or at what time, has equal opportunity to fathom and understand the meaning and the worth of life, or the lack of the worth of life. There is no privileged position in history where you can come to grips with that. No. Godot, Beckett's Godot, and Attendant Godot. Waiting for it, waiting. Who knows how to live in eternity in the present? What is it that most people do and how they spend their life? Waiting, waiting, waiting for salvation to come from outside. Isn't it? The waiting for God waiting for the last judgment, waiting for the revolution. People live in the present, enjoying fully time in the present from day to day. They splurge and waste the day, waiting for the weekend. From weekend to weekend, from holiday to holiday, from vacation to vacation, Christmas to Easter, and in between, vacuous waiting, emptiness, waiting for something to happen, salvation outside of themselves. And we wait. And life passes us by. And most of us derive nothing out of it. It is emptiness, complete emptiness, void of vacuity. So what is, as a matter of fact, the perspective, the conclusion to be drawn from this? The notion of, note that very notion of salvation and redemption. And the notion that it is outside of us or within us. We certainly have a number of alternatives here to explore. And now we must move from this to Devotanam, the will to power, in connection with life and the affirmation of life. And what is meant by a higher mode of life and a lower mode. What's the role of ideals? What is the role, as a matter of fact, in this connection of Uberman? In Heidegger, you will note that this becomes the expression that time is time within each individual's own life, birth to death. And hence that meaningfulness and the worthwhileness is to be found within that horizon. But of course, as it relates to the overlapping horizons of others, of one's parents and of one's descendants, children. What now is the talk of life as a will to power? That is, one has an enormous amount of energy in the universe, force, but it is unlimited. And we see two different phenomena here. The tendency of force to accumulate and to centralize, to mobilize, to different forces to become aligned against each other. There is force and there is resistance. There is attraction. There is repulsion. There is conflict, warfare, struggle between opposed forces, and what brings about a temporary stasis, that is a state of equilibrium, peace, and rest. It is always a tension of opposites, of opposite forces. The impress of Heraclitus here in Nietzsche's thought is prominent and is very, very important. The tendency to accumulate and centralize, as a matter of fact, force, but also, on the other hand, for it to expand and expend itself, to give of itself and to expand. And we want to understand that on a cosmological scale. And we also want to understand what it means with respect to life itself and that phenomenon. Life and death, continually in one. When you look at life, it involves metabolic process activity. And this is simultaneously, just as it is in chemistry, the laws of nature. Whenever you have a chemical reaction, you have a double arrow. I mean, it is going one direction and it's also going in reverse. Point of equilibrium of the reaction. And with respect to metabolism, you have catabolic processes, synthesis, building up out of simpler materials, the raw materials that are assimilated, more complex sources of energy. That is, the chemical complexity stores energy. And there is also the process that's taking place in terms of the release of that energy once it is stored. There are both of these, stored energy and the release of it. And this is enormously important. So you have the process of catabolism, catabolic processes that are what? I mean, you have those that involve synthesis, and you have those that involve what? Breakdown, destruction. What are the you have anabolic processes and catabolic. Incidentally, which are the catabolic processes? What are they? What are they? Who knows? Don't be bluffing. Who knows? Is it the synthesis or the breakdown?
It's three categories.
Yes, and I'm glad you did it because I had reversed it and I wanted it caught so that we get it right. Didn't want any bluffing. I just realized what it was doing. It's the reverse. The catabolic process is that, as a matter of fact, it's obvious from the Greek. So the breakdown, the catabolic process, and the anabolic, and they go together. This is life. I mean, synthesis and what? Breakdown. The storing up of energy and the releasing of it. An equilibrium within different forces and processes in the body. We are continuously living and dying. And what prevents death is an equilibrium between the anabolic processes and the catabolic processes. All the phenomena in nature generally. And life itself is one of them. Of this delicate balance of forces. Life itself, life and death inextricably connected up together. Nietzsche sees this, and he sees that it's a beautiful example of the principle of Heraclitus over and over again of nature in its temporary states of stasis, of peace, is equilibrium and a tension between conflicting, opposed forces, the tension between them. And you cannot have, as a matter of fact, the phenomenon without that. And it is very, very important as Nietzsche sees this. In that respect, with respect to power and the will to power, it always involves a certain give and take. The will to power is the tendency of a center of power anywhere to mobilize around and draw to it. It desires, it wants, it aspires to draw more power within its orbit. And either it succeeds in doing this, appropriating it, mobilizing it. That is, with respect to human beings, there are different organizations, social organizations. And there is a tendency for, but dominant, strong power to mobilize and to attract to it other weaker powers, to organize it around itself, to establish, as a matter of fact, greater power. look at history, at politics, the nature of social organization. Or it fails to do because there are competing centers of power. And it may not migrate around one, but migrate around another. There is always that tendency. In this respect, there can be something like justice and agreement when you have equals. Equals with respect to power. That is, when you have inter pares among equals, then you can speak, for example, of justice and what? The resolution of issues by an appeal to agreement. We'll cooperate. We will become a confederacy and align ourselves against other powers. Always note, in terms of history, the language that's used, the 90s, alliances, the balance of power, what happens when power gets out of hand. Go and read, as a matter of fact, about the Melian episode. The Greek historians are great, are they not? Thucydides. I mean, just consider that great war and conflict. One of its allies, Athens. Bring them into line with respect. And they talk cold turkey. And this is what we do in the modern world, too. Rich. You don't have anything to negotiate with here. We are the superior force. We outnumber you in the harbor in here. These are our terms. Accept them. Or face annihilation. Damn it, we've had enough. And this is war, conflict between confederacy and confederacy. Are you to be a member of the Amphictyon Confederacy or not? Very important. And over again, where is there justice and fairness? Look, this is not to state a norm and something one rejoices over and to say this is the way it should be, damn it. It's realism, whether you like it or not. How have human beings acted in the course of history? What do you expect? Not, it would be so nice here. I didn't like this. Whine all you want. The truth of the matter is, this is the way human beings are and have treated each other. And of course, there's always a lot of hypocrisy and talk about otherwise. But it's never, as a matter of fact, been instituted and practiced. The stronger bring the weak into line, to join them, not necessarily to destroy them, but to be their tools and instrument and join them, or. And what is generally the consequences and the results of this? That is, when Nietzsche wants to talk about the will to power, he wants to talk about this tendency, because note, with respect to life, it's not merely the storing up of power, but life is related to and connected to action. Not contemplation, not the idea of being pure angelic spectators in nature and the world, a la Plato, but being active participants in the world, acting and doing. And this requires the release of energy that is stored up in it. So that life involves not merely a storing and a hoarding for a time of one's energies, but also a release of it. And in that respect, he speaks of a life that is overflowing, superabundant from power. And you don't get it from weakness. The sun that Zarathustra reads each morning, and that he worships the symbol in nature. of force and energy, a dynamo, gives out of its overflowing superabundance. That is an image and a metaphor that Nietzsche wants to use over and over and over again about life and about different individuals in life. There are those that give spontaneously and irresistibly. That is their nature, as it is with respect to Zarathustra. And there are those that do not give, that cannot have nothing to give and take. And that is fine. That is the way of life and of nature. But in this respect, one can talk about a criterion of higher life that gives and gives spontaneously and out of its superabundance, and those that can do nothing but take because they have, as a matter of fact, nothing to give. That is going to tie up in many ways that idea of the Ubermensch, or the higher man, with that of the lower man. And that sort of connection up between strength and weakness. Some sort of ideas that many people do not like to contemplate. But over and over again, Nietzsche is misrepresented and misunderstood, and deliberately so, in terms of what he has to say in this connection. Note, the sun, once again, is a balance, a precarious equilibrium and balance between opposing forces. You can see that it's about to get out of hand at times. The solar flares. And the other phenomenon between that delicate balance between the expansive force of the heat of the body to expand and the gravitational force that balances it and gives the sun the diameter that it has. It's burning underneath that. I mean, the nuclear reactions that in Nietzsche's time they didn't know about. And an enormous amount of energy is radiating away, gives out of its fullness. It spreads out, the tendency of such force. We take, we are nourished, we are illuminated. Life is made possible for us by this spontaneous superabundance. In a way, Nietzsche can understand, as many others, the worship of a natural force of nature, like the sun and the sun worship, and understanding it in this way. Much better than that cold, transcendental, logical abortion, the God of Judaism and Christianity. I mean, a deity that is immanent within nature, or that is identifiable with it, rather than that transcendent creator. When we view this in this fashion, note how one must then understand the alliances, what goes on in nature, what goes on in human organizations, our social affairs, to understand, as a matter of fact, life at rock bottom. And of course, you've been taught not to understand it that way. That is a part of you being taught to be anti-nature. That you do not understand life in terms of power and of power conflicts. That as a matter of fact, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power is the source of evil, rather than the source of all possible goods. And it is the vested interest of certain powerful ones to emasculate you and deny you the opportunity to think realistically about power and power conflicts. No, you're to think in terms of niceness, goodness, sweetness, light, kindness, happiness. God to prepare you to be the castrati that they would destine you to be in life. You better believe it. No, not power, but to think in terms of power alliances, power conflict, the resolution of the power struggles, and the institution of equilibrium, and what? Temporary peace. Peace we all treasure indeed as a result of conflict. The rest from the struggle and strife. But the idea that that is a state that is eternally achievable in nature, or a state of paradisical happiness that is perpetual and eternal, without the period of unrest, struggle, and suffering. Oh, those that want to obliterate all oppositions, the conflict, to have a homogeneous, so they think, in realistic life and world. What raving madness out there, raving madness. Christianity. But now note in this respect, because it's nice, Zarathustra himself is just like the sun. He is strong, vigorous, overflowing, active. You know people like that? Not dead. Zarathustra has something to offer. He'll sting you if you try to get at that golden honey, the product of nature, the wisdom. It's going to cost you, but most people don't know the value of it. And they're different out there. Look, my word, we read it and think about it. What Zarathustra has to offer as a teacher, which doesn't mean that one buys it all, but so much to offer, so rich. And obviously there's a difference in degree with respect to teachers. Look at us, the rest of us out here, teachers. 90% of them intellectual prostitutes. They haven't the remotest idea what they teach. I wonder sometimes. It does not come both from the head and the heart with passion. It is sterile nothingness. You people all know it. In that respect, one might say, what a difference in the order of us all rank. And know primarily what it is interesting when Nietzsche judges the higher. Those that out of richness and superabundance give and can give, and those that have nothing whatsoever to give. Are you to feel ashamed and guilty? And what do you do when you go out there in life? I went and grabbed and took from Arthur Murphy, from Bowsman, from A.I. Meldon, from Mandelbrot, from R.L. Moore, from teachers in genius. And I wanted it. It was important. And I felt no shame in taking what they had to give. And I was certainly no egalitarian when it came to that. I was an elitist. Those. Well, there are all of these other people. There are these other teachers. Horseshit! I don't want idiots. second-rate and third-raters. There's no criterion for that whatsoever. In a certain way, a man makes clear that he is a criterion in terms of which others are to be judged. He is himself not judged. Zarathustra made that perfectly clear about himself. Zarathustra is a standard, perhaps in terms of which you and I and others can be judged, modeled. It is a paradigm in a certain way. So that becomes very, very important. When we come exactly to that question, which we want to press now, in terms of life as the will to power. How does it enable us to understand history, politics, ourself, our relation to others? He says in that connection, remember, I don't have the copy. Of that here. I do have something else, though. This particular view that you have Spinozistic and Nietzsche is found in a way in Samuel Taylor Coleridge in the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And how, as a Christian, vaunteth as a Christian, the ancient mariner comes to put a curse on life and existence, to curse it, and to kill the albatross. And the albatross that falls upon his head. It's the values of Christianity that's alienated him from nature. It makes him war with it and curse it. And he has to give up those values. And give a stubborn benediction of actuality, a blessing on all nature for what it is. Good and evil, cruelty, kindness, whatever one sees in it. Bless it and love it as he incites the beauty of it above our moralistic good and evil. I'll begin reading it apart. Nature, the sublimity, repellent character of it. And through the drifts, the snowy drifts, did send a dismal sheen. And our shapes of men, our beasts we ken, the ice was all between. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swound. At length did cross an albatross, through the fog it came, as if it had a Christian soul. We hailed it in God's name. It ate the food, it ne'er had eat, and round it flew. The ice did spit with a thunder fit, the helmsman steered us through. And a good south wind sprung up behind, the albatross did follow, and every day for food or play came to the mariner's hollow. In mist or cloud, on mast or shroud, it perched for vespers 9, while all the night through the fog smoke white glimmered the white moonshine. God save the ancient mariner from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why, lookest thou so? With my crossbow I shot the albatross. Yes. And then what happened? All in the hot and copper sky, the bloody sun at noon, right up above the mast did stand, no bigger than the moon. Day after day, we stuck in our breath and our motion, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, and our youth dropped to dream. The very deep did rot, O Christ, that ever this should be. Yea, slimy things did crawl with legs upon the slimy sea. About in reel and rout, the death fires danced at night. The water, like a witch's oils, burnt green and blue and white. And those are ribs through which the sun did peer as through a grate. And is that woman all her crew? Is that a death, and are there two? Is death that woman's mate? Her lips were red, her looks were free, her locks were yellow as gold. Her skin was as white as leprosy. The nightmare, life and death was she, who fixed men's blood with cold. Eventually what happened? That brought him to bless the albatross, a stubborn benediction on all nature. And that very language of that is so pronounced, remarkable. For thou art innocent, albatross, and so am I with thee. Nature in her shrouds, in her innocence, we are all insights from the innocent, not to be judged in terms of good and evil. Nature can do what God cannot. Nature can love and accept all, as the ancient mariner did, without passing judgment and cursing or blessing, bestowing reward and punishment. Nature does not need to forgive. It is simply blind and oblivious. Towards the end. How long in that same pit I lay, I have not to declare. But ere my living life returned, I heard and in my soul discerned two voices in the air. Is it he, quoth one, is this the man? By him who died on cross. Through his cruel bow, he laid full low the heart's albatross. The spirit who bideth by himself, a land of mist and snow. He loved the bird that loved the man who shot him with his bow. The other was a softer voice, as soft as honey dew, quoth he. The man hath penance done, and penance more will do. Do you understand that? Who are the two voices? The last is the voice of the Christian God judge. That's who it is. And you can imagine what Coleridge thought of that. Now we're getting to the point where we'll be able to pull together the threat and problem of nihilism, man's alienation from nature, how that fits in with the will to power, and with Nietzsche's conception of the world, the origin of the values, and what the problem of the values are for humankind, for those that have sense enough to take any problem seriously for what it is. All right, so much for today.